Are you in a waiting room, you said, Mike?
It just says waiting for the host to start this meeting. So
Oh, there you go.
got your email today said classes for the week.
Yeah. Okay, well,
Maybe I'm in the wrong one. No, I'm in the right one.
I see people coming into the one that, give me a second.
7:14 this morning. It says Mike's RPA class part 1 at 1 o'clock, Wednesday the 17th. I'm going off an email this morning.
Oh, lovely.
Host
Well,
will be in soon.
let me send, you might have the wrong link. I mean, the only thing I can think.
It was the one that was.
Oh, here you are, here. Hold on. I see you.
All right, sounds good. Make me a co-host, okay?
I will.
All right, thanks.
All right. All right, Mike. Yeah, you're co-host now.
All right, great. Thanks. Okay. We'll wait a couple more minutes. Some people are coming in and then we'll get started. All right, guys, we're going to get started. And this is the new CAR RPA that's going to be released probably in about a month from now. In the second week in December is what I'm expecting. So there's a lot of differences from this contract versus the one we're currently using, and a lot of the same. So most of it is just how it's moved around in the contract. The important thing is that we go over it. You'll know most of it. There's a couple of things that are going to be different, and we just need to go through it. It's gone up from the 10 pages to 16 pages. And the new format, really what we'll cover today is what's called the grid, which is paragraph 3, and we'll cover a lot of it, most of the grid today. And I'm going to put it on, I'm going to share the screen right now. And we're going to open it up. And can everyone see the screen? Everyone see the contract?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So we're going to take about 2 hours to go through it today, and then tomorrow the 2 hours will go through the remainder of it. So we'll get the meat and potatoes done today. Unlike when I usually teach the contracts class, I say just ask questions whenever, I'm gonna ask that we wait till the end of each page to go over the questions. It might, I think it'll flow a little bit easier. And we should have time at the end of the each class to go over any in-depth questions that you have. But I think when you get through the class, now most of you have taken the risk management class already. Vicky Nadorf taught it, so this shouldn't be brand new to a lot of you. For some of you, it might be, but that's okay. I hope when we get out of it after tomorrow, you'll say, hey, this has been a good improvement over what we're currently using. And yet it's going to be more of a simplification is what I'm hoping for, is the outcome on this. Okay, so let's get started. Again, as I told you, this is 16 pages. What I want to make sure is that since things are moved around a little bit and a lot of the deal points are just really in one place, I don't want agents to just deal with the deal points and disregard the rest of the contract in dealing with their clients. So it is 16 pages. So let's get started right at the top, the date prepared. Again, there's no legal significance for that. It's just used as a reference point, and we date when we're completing the contract. We put the date in and go from there. Paragraph 1. This is an offer from. This is where the buyer's name is. Just like the current contract, the property acquired. The property to be acquired. The blank there is the address. Everything else is the same. The difference in assessor's parcel number, do you see the S next to it? You could fill in more than one APN number. And why are they doing that? They're adding another APN number. I think it'll be beneficial. If you guys are familiar with the SB 9, where the state law is, you could take a property, one property, and if it meets the qualifications, you could divide the property into another property and build a additional unit, so that you basically will have more density in properties. And that's where I think we'll see the APN numbers once this SB 9 takes place and more people utilize that, and we'll have more APN numbers and more buildings. That might be the reason why the Forms Committee decided to do that. If you look right below that, it's a disclaimer that just because there's an address for a city, it may not be in the same jurisdiction of the original city. For example, there's areas of Campbell that maybe the post office address is Campbell, but it's under the city of San Jose jurisdiction. So they're just putting that there as to the buyer to investigate to make sure that the postal address is the same as the jurisdiction address. If you look to see what's different about this paragraph 1, the difference here in this paragraph is that it doesn't say anything about the purchase price and doesn't say anything about the close of escrow. That'll be moved down to paragraph 3, the grid, where it's there. So that's, rest assured, the contract hasn't lost its purchase price or close of escrow date, but it will be seating in another paragraph. Paragraph C, the reason that's put in there, the terms of this purchase are specified below and on the following pages. It's all on 16 pages. So these terms in paragraph C will be on the paragraph 3, as well as other parts of the contract. And then the paragraph D is where the buyer and seller are parties to the contract, and the agents, brokers and agents are not parties to the agreement, although we're parties to the escrow so that we can get paid. Okay, let's get on to paragraph 2. Nothing really has changed in paragraph 2. The important things are still there. They did add that under disclosure is that each party should have a CAR Form AD. A buyer does an agency disclosure when they're writing up the offer, and a seller is doing an agency disclosure with the listing agent or seller's agent when the listing's being done. So what they did add was this line right here, where it says the buyer's agent is not legally required to give to the seller's agent. So basically the AD or agency disclosure, seller has theirs, buyer has theirs, and they don't need to exchange it. Now, in reality is the buyer's agency disclosure is part of the purchase agreement, and the buyer's agency is submitted with the purchase agreement to the seller. But this is new to the current contract. Paragraph B, when I do file review, I would say half the mistakes that are done on the purchase agreement are done in paragraph 2B, where the either it's not completed entirely, something's left off, boxes are not checked properly or not checked at all, and an incomplete is the same thing as being incorrect. The reason why this is important is that there's case law where the seller has refused to pay commission because the agency confirmation was not completed correctly, and the court ruled with the seller, and the sellers have not had to pay commission based on it being incorrectly filled out. Let's wait till questions until we get to the bottom of the page. Let's go over confirmation. What goes where? B, seller's brokerage firm. That's where the listing agent, the seller's brokerage firm is completed here. Their DRE number is put here. The seller's agent is put here. The license number is here. Check the box. Now, who is the seller's brokerage firm? It's either the seller or both the buyer and the seller, which would be dual agent. Same thing applies under the seller's agent. Complete the boxes, one or the other, one or the other. Same thing in buyer's brokerage firm. The company, their DRE number, whether they represent just the buyer or represent both the buyer and the seller. Now, in dual agent, the representation is the company. So if you have a listing and an agent in your office represents the buyer, that is considered dual agent. So you could represent both the buyer and the seller, or you and one of your cohorts in your office represents the other party, then that is considered dual agency. And then the buyer's brokerage firm goes there, the buyer's agent goes here, and the license number goes here. So, and then the check the box. The important thing is, if you are the listing agent and the buyer's agent who completes this purchase agreement incompletely fills out this confirmation, you need to deal with it in a counter offer. And the way that you properly deal with it is see attached confirmation of agency, which you can get in zip forms, and that is to be, you complete that and fill it out. Now, as a buyer's agent, you have all the access to this information on the MLS. You have the seller's company's DRE number, you have the seller's agent's DRE number. Please put it in and make it complete. So just because the buyer's agent completes the purchase agreement, the seller's agent should be responsible for making sure that this is correct, just like any other incomplete or incorrect information that's put on the contract. You need to fix it with a counter offer. Okay, so that takes care of the confirmation of agency. None of you guys are ever going to have this problem again and I'm never gonna have to go through your file review and make a correction on this. You get one of my love letters on review. Okay, paragraph C. This is where there is more than one company that represents the buyer or the seller. More than one brokerage represents the seller or the buyer. And then if you check this box, then you will get a form ABA that'll be spit out when it's written up. And that's the additional broker acknowledgement. Now there's two acknowledgements that we have. One is the additional broker acknowledgement, and the other one is the additional agent acknowledgement. The broker acknowledgement is where there's more than one company. The agent acknowledgement is where there's more than one agent from the same company. Okay, paragraph D, potentially competing buyers and sellers. This form PRBS is where it is letting buyers and sellers know, and both buyers and sellers will be getting this PRBS, one with the listing, the other with the purchase agreement. And that is letting them know that the brokerage will be representing more than one buyer or one seller, and could be representing more than another buyer on the same property that you're making an offer on this property. It is incorrectly argued that this form enables buyers to represent more than one buyer on the same property. Technically, by law, maybe that is true, but I'm going to tell you by law, we're going to get our heads handed to us if we represent more individually. You represent two buyers on the same property. You are just opening yourself up to a misrepresentation in a fiduciary manner by the buyer that does not get the property in this market. So I just want to make sure that you understand, as far as I'm concerned, and most brokers that are practicing today, is that this PRBS form is geared towards the company, that the company may represent more buyers and sellers in the area, and more buyers on this particular property on that. It's not individual, it's the company. Okay. The other thing that I want to talk to you about this, which is under paragraph 3, the items of this paragraph are contractual terms of this agreement. This form is 16 pages. The parties are advised to read all 16 pages. This grid, which encompasses the next couple pages, it's not a summary. It is actually contractual obligations of the contract, but it's put in this form. There's also supplemental areas. If you look at the paragraphs, for example, paragraph A refers to paragraph 5, which is the purchase price. Now, this is what I hear on this, which I think technology-wise is going to be pretty awesome. You could put your pointer on paragraph 5 like this, and I believe what they're telling me is that paragraph 5 will show up, and you'll be able to reference the paragraph when you highlight it here. I'm also led to believe that when you get to paragraph 5 and you put your pointer on paragraph 5 in the next couple pages, it'll reference the grid. So it's kind of going back and forth. So you'll be able to use look at the grid as well as the individual paragraph when you're completing the contract or reviewing it in zip forms. Technology. Okay, so let's get into the grid and let's get into the deal points on this. Here's where, instead of paragraph 1, it's now in paragraph 3, where it talks about the purchase price, and the purchase price is a blank line right here. If it is all cash, you check the box for additional terms. If it's not all cash, you just put the purchase price in. Paragraph B, close of escrow. In the current contract, that's in paragraph 1 on top of the page. It's moved down to now paragraph 3. Close of escrow, COE. You have an option, either blank days after acceptance or on a certain date. Either one works. I want to kind of step ahead and talk about days after acceptance, and that's in the definitions that we'll go over tomorrow. But days after acceptance means that if you accept a contract today, that is day 0. Tomorrow is day 1. So I want to make sure we cover that, number 1. And number 2, what does days mean? Days means that if it falls on a weekend, it would go to the next day. So in other words, if we put 30 days after acceptance, and that acceptance date 30 days from now turns out to be a Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday, it automatically goes to the next business day. Okay, I want to make sure you guys understand that. And to anything in here that we're talking about days, day 0 is when it gets signed, and when's the agreement. That's day 0, and everything gets counted on beyond that. Tomorrow would be day 1. Friday would be day 2, Saturday would be day 3, Sunday would be day 4, and there we go from there. Okay, let's talk about next one is paragraph C, which is referenced in 32A, which is the expiration of the offer. So it's saying 3 calendar days after all the buyer's signatures. If it's not 3 calendar days and you want to change that, you put the date down. Similar to what we've done in the past, 3 days or put the date. And then you put either, if it's 5 p.m. is not good enough, you put the time down here. So that's expiration of the offer. Okay. Initial deposit amount. Same as what we have currently, with one exception. The number here would be the amount, and then you could put the percentage down. So if you put the percentage down of, say, 3% of initial deposit, and you put the number here, this is saying that the percentage is just a number for reference purposes. It's not tied to the contract in terms of what is required as far as the deposit goes. So for example, say you put an initial deposit of $30,000 on a $1 million sale, that would be 3% of the purchase price. Say you get a counter of $1.1 million, that 3% initial deposit amount doesn't change. That the number here, which is that $30,000, unless it's countered, that not just the price is going to be changed, but the deposit is going to be staying at 3%. If that is not addressed in the counter offer, it'll be accepted at with that $1.1 million, but that $30,000 deposit will be the initial deposit. So that doesn't change unless you change it on or address it on the counter offer. So that takes care of the deposit. And then in the additional terms, it's 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer. In the current contract, it gives a different amount of options, where it's either wire transferred, which is still the default, or it says a check, or it says other means. Here, it doesn't say anything. It just says wire transfer or check the box. So within 3 business days. So that's when the deposit needs to be done, and by wire transfer. That's the default on this. Okay. Increased deposit. So we talked about the 3% as initial deposit. Guys, back in the day when the market was different and it was a normal market where the buyer had some sort of negotiating power, the initial deposit wasn't always 3%. A lot of the times it was, say, 1%, and then the additional increase in deposit would be the difference to make it 3%. So in the last so many years, we've always had 3%, but years gone by, it was a combination of initial deposit and increased deposit to make it 3%. So the same thing, the verbiage for the increased deposit, if there is going to be one, is the same thing as the initial deposit. It's a dollar amount, the percentage, but again, the percentage is calculated. It's not a contractual item. It's just for calculation purposes only. But here's the increased deposit. And when is that increased deposit supposed to happen? These are where the additional terms come into play. It's going to be the removal of all contingencies, or there's a date, would be the first box, or the second box is what other event would take place if it's not a date or upon removal of contingencies, what other item of or event would take place to make that increase in deposit take place. So you would check the box and put something down. One of the things that's different from our current contract is what is called the form DID. Before that form, or as of today, that is a receipt for increase in deposit, RID. They changed the form to reflect, what's the name on that? 5A. I'm gonna have to look it up. I forget. I keep on forgetting that one.
Delivery.
There we go. Okay, thank you. So it's just a change of form. From RID, it's becoming the DID form. And the important thing is when there is an increased deposit, you need to have that other form accompany that deposit so that it could be part of liquidated damages. And we'll get into liquidated damages tomorrow. They move liquidated damages to the very end of the contract along with the arbitration. So a lot of things in this contract are moved around, but they're still the same verbiage and still the same, the same paragraphs as what we're currently using. So we covered the deposits. Now let's get into the loan amounts. So for the loan amounts, okay, 1 second. Okay, I covered that already. Loan amounts. So the first loan would be this number right here, which would be also the percentage of what the loan amount is. Is it an 80% of the purchase price, 50%, 80%, 90%? So that would be covered there. Then the next thing would be, is it a fixed rate or initial adjustable rate not to exceed a percentage number? So if there's a contingency, a loan contingency, it's important that you put a number here. Fixed rate or adjustable rate not to exceed number. It's kind of a mini contingency for the loan. It's a protection for the buyer before they're able to lock in their rate. So if there's a loan contingency, it's to get a loan. Now, right now, the current interest rates, I really don't even know. I'm going to say 3.5%. So you would put a number in there for protection on the buyer should there be a catastrophic event that takes place in the next day or two before you're able to lock in your rate. If you have a loan contingency, because if there's a catastrophic event and the rates go from 3% to 10%, does that maybe change the interest of your buyer in order to buy this property with this loan amount? Yes. Now, here's the thing. If the interest rates go up substantially and say it's double the interest, it's double the monthly payment, and your buyer can qualify for the new rate and new loan, the contingency of getting the loan doesn't cover your buyer in order to get out of the deal and get his deposit back. That's why this number is filled out, so that it's a mini contingency to the big loan contingency, is not only qualifying for a loan and obtaining the loan, but also obtaining a loan at an interest rate that is acceptable to the buyer. If there's a loan contingency and there's nothing filled out here, and that catastrophe happens and the rates go from 3 to 8%, and your buyer wants out, yet he qualifies for the loan at 8%, he doesn't have a legal right based on the loan contingency to cancel the contract and get his deposit back. Because the loan contingency is obtaining a loan. It has nothing to do with about what interest rate's going to be unless you put that number in here. I can't stress that enough. Now, conversely, if there's no loan contingency, it doesn't matter what's in here. It means nothing, because the buyer is not having a contingency on getting a loan, period. So it doesn't matter whether it's at 3, 10, 12, or 1%. The buyer is saying he's going to get a loan no matter what, and there's no contingency on that. So I want to make sure that that is clear with everyone regarding this little exceed blank percent number in here. It is important if you have a loan contingency. It is meaningless if you don't have a loan contingency. Next thing is points. Buyer to pay 0 points. That's the default. Current contract doesn't have a default. It just has a blank to pay up to a certain amount. Here it's 0 points, or if you're going to change it, here's where you put the if it's going to be a 1%, 2%, whatever the percentage of loan amount, that's going to be the points on that. The third item here under terms and conditions is if it's going to be an FHA or VA, there's going to be a list of lender required repairs. Here it's saying the terms and conditions going to be 17 or blank days after acceptance that the seller gets the list from the buyer. It has nothing to do with who's going to be doing the repairs, who's going to be responsible for paying for the repairs. All it's saying is that that checklist needs to be given to the seller within 17 days after acceptance. Let's go in here to the additional terms. That the type of loan is going to be a conventional loan. That's the default. If there's going to be a FHA or VA, then that would be checked. The last item would be that there's a seller financing. The one thing that's missing on this box from the current contract that is not in the new contract on the new RPA coming out next month is assuming the financing. That box has been eliminated because we haven't had assumptions of any loans in a real long time. So the Forms Committee decided to take it out. So everything in here is the same as what we have right now, with the exception of assuming the existing loan. Now, one thing I want to tell you about the CAR forms FVAC and HID, or actually the FHA, the VA, is that there's a built-in legal appraisal contingency that if it does not appraise under this government financing, the buyer has the right to cancel the contract and get his money back. Even if he waived the contingency, the buyer has a right with the government loan that they get that money, that deposit back to the buyer. That is law. And even if they put down zero financing or has no appraisal contingency, it does not matter. They're entitled to get that back. E2 is additional financing. That's where if there would be a second deed of trust. And it has the same information as the terms are the same as whether the first loan also is in there in the second loan. Everything is the same. E3, occupancy type. Basically, the default is the primary. It could be a secondary where you have a second home, or it could be the investment. Those three, but the default is primary. Again, why do we care? The lender cares. And that's what they're giving the loan to based on whether it's a primary, secondary, or investment. F is the balance of the down payment. So you got your deposits, the loan amounts, down payment, and that equals the total purchase price. Similar to what we have right now. It's just everything is in one area, and it's all the deal points in this paragraph 3. Any questions on page 1?
Mike, Rachna here. In
Yeah.
what situation will people be doing increased deposit?
Well, the increased deposit would be where the initial deposit is not 3%. If I was a seller's agent, I would want to make sure that there's a 3% deposit put into escrow when the contingencies are removed, so that the buyer is at risk the maximum amount if liquidated damages is used. So if the initial deposit's only 1%, then the increased deposit would be utilized for the other 2% at in most cases the removal of the contingencies.
So we should still keep it till 3, and do you see agents start playing around with it and increasing it more than 3% of purchase price?
I don't see that because it's immaterial. If it's more than 3%, 4%, 5%, it doesn't matter, because the only issue that really is the true deposit, where a seller can go after the deposit would be if the buyer defaults. It would be liquidated damages, which limits it to 3% at risk.
Okay.
And do I see things going back to initial deposits lower than 3%? I really don't see that right now, because the market conditions dictate that it's a seller's market. And when things change and becomes a buyer's market, then you'll see probably the initial deposit and increased deposit used.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other questions on page 1?
I have a question. Just regarding the agency relationship disclosure at the top there. Do you have any idea if they're going to fix the box checking issue that they have currently, where, for example, now if I check that the brokerage represents both,
Yep.
then it automatically checks that the individual agents represent both?
Yeah, they've been dealing with that for a while. I don't know what's going on, why that can't be satisfied. I'm hoping that it's taken care of in this new release.
Because now, as it stands now, I just don't check anything, and then you have to remember to check it in DocuSign to make it correct. Otherwise, it's automatic function.
No, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but yeah. I guess they're viewing it that dual agency is the individual agents represent both parties, since the company represent both parties, but that's really not a true indication of what's going on. Yeah,
if we
and-
do have that, we should we should have individual agents only representing, opposite parties, but the broker representing both, right? That's the way it's supposed to be checked, correct?
That's how I would view it, because I think it gives, I think it gives a false, in my mind, it gives a false sense that if you have both buyers and sellers dual agent under where the buyer's agent and seller's agent is supposed to be checked, I think that's not a fair indication. I think that it should be the seller only and the buyer only, but I don't know why this hasn't been able to be fixed in my mind. But yeah, I would like you to do it the way that you just said, that the company represents both, but the agent, individual buyer's agent and seller's agent represents the individual buyer seller. Until we're proven wrong, then we'll just keep on going that way. Anything else?
Yeah, Mike, just further clarification of, it was 3B, you were talking about days
Three,
after acceptance, close of escrow, days after acceptance. You were talking about Saturday and Sunday, and I think I
Yeah.
got confused on what counts or
well,
not.
everything counts. The
Yeah.
days, weekends, business days and calendar days, it's calendar days. Except if it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, then it moves to the next business day.
Okay, if it falls on,
That's
The-
correct.
if it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, it goes to the next business day, even though it says calendar days.
Yeah, what
Okay.
I said, yeah, it says days after acceptance.
Yes.
So if it says 30 days, you count 30 days. And you count Saturdays and Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
If it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or business, or a holiday, that just like any action item that needs to happen, it goes to the next business, it goes to the next business day.
Okay, that 30th day.
That's correct. What it
Okay.
falls on.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's get going on. If there's anything else, or we're gonna get going on page 2. All right, let's get started on page 2. G1, seller credit, if any, to buyer. This talks about whether if there is a credit from the seller to the buyer, it identifies what the amount's going to be, and that it's additional terms, seller credit to be applied to closing costs, or the default is that it's going to be applied towards closing costs. Anything else, which I really can't think of, a lender accepting that, that I would actually rather have you not use. For example, I guess it could be seller credit of a certain amount of money for other, could be for repairs. But then that gets in a whole can of worms, whether the lender's going to want to know what the heck's going on and want to have everything completed. So I would stay away from that and just go with what the contract deals with, which is a credit towards closing costs, which could get into a problem is that how much are the closing costs going to be, and whether that credit is going to exceed what is allowable by the lender. And if the credit exceeds what is allowable by the lender, then that is going to be limited to what the lender approves. So work with your lender if you're negotiating any type of seller credit. Okay. Additional financing terms. This is where, this is where the any additional things that you would want to put in there would just like in the current contract, a blank for you to put what you want to put in there. What I like about H1, H2, and H3, everything is put together in the same place instead of different parts of the contract. So these are verifications. Verifications if someone's making an all cash offer, verifications of the down payment and closing costs, and verification of the loan application. So let's get into this in a little more detail. Verification of all cash. So in the current contract, it says that the verification is going to be given within 3 days of acceptance. Or at the end of that paragraph, there's a checkbox. Here it's a little reversed. Here it's saying that the verifications are going to be given with the offer. And then if not, then there's a checkbox that could be 3 days or how many days after acceptance. So the default on all three of these is that it's going to be accompanied with the offer. And to be honest with you guys, this is what makes more sense anyway, right? So, but it does allow for any changes to that if it's not attached to the offer. So both of these three things. Look at additional terms for the verification of loan application. That the lender letter, the pre-qualification, the pre-approval, the fully underwriting pre-approval. It's basically gives an option of which one is that letter going to be from the lender to the seller and seller's agent. There's no legal definition of a pre-qualification, pre-approval, or fully underwritten pre-approval. You're going to have to investigate and check out what that letter is and what the lender's saying. So, but at least there's a checkbox that can be given from the buyer's agent as to what they're providing. But as a seller's agent and a seller, you need to kind of dig and actually see what it is. Is it really a pre-approval? Or is it really just a pre-qualification? Okay. Something new. Back to I. This was intentionally left blank. The reason being is this a letter or is this a number? So they don't want to screw around with it. So they just left it blank and not dealing with it. So that's why that's not that one or I is left alone. J, final verification of condition. The current contract says that and I'll say this a walkthrough, but final verification of condition says within 5 days. This new contract takes out the within and eliminates it. So now there's a definite day to do that verification of condition. Here it says 5 days. Doesn't say within 5 days. It now says 5 days. That's a difference in the contract. This contract versus the current one. If you don't want 5 days, you want to make a difference, put it in here. You want to make it 3 days, put it 3 days, 2 days, whatever. I don't care. But now you don't have that loosey-goosey way of within 5 days. It's now a set date prior to close of escrow. The other thing that's different is assignment. And we'll get into paragraph 23 more in detail tomorrow. But this assignment request, which currently in this current RPA, that date that the assignment can be requested during the entire close of escrow. Here it is saying that the seller you have to, as a buyer, you have to assign this contract if you plan on assigning it within the first 17 days of acceptance. If you don't do it within the 17 days, the seller, which up until now can't unreasonably withhold the acceptance, now after 17 days with this new contract can withhold the acceptance of the assignment within after 17 days. So that's a big change. And I think it's for the better. So that's the final verification is changed, getting rid of within. And then K is assignment request 17 days after acceptance, 17 days is another change as well. And again, we'll go into detail on the verbiage of these items when we get to the actual paragraph. But this again are deal terms, which puts it all in one place, all the deal terms in there. Okay, let's get into L1. All the contingencies, and there's 8 of them totaling in this contract, and they're all together instead of spaced out throughout the current contract, all throughout the contract with these contingencies. Now we're in one place. Okay. And then the other thing I'm going to tell you, if you look at the time element to remove the contingencies, they were all currently, they're all different. What's 17 days, what's 21 days, everything like that. Here, it's all 17 days from acceptance. All these contingencies say the same timeframes. All right, let's get into it now. Loans, 17 days, or you fill in how many days after acceptance to remove the loan contingency. And then if there's no loan contingency, you check the box. The next paragraph, which I really, really like, is this appraisal contingency and the verbiage on this. Appraisal contingency based upon appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price, or check the box. So we've seen contracts written where they tried to change the appraisal contingency from a true at purchase price to a certain number, and it just got slaughtered. This is really simple, simplistic, and easy. Say you're buying a property for $1 million, but the buyer has an extra $50,000 that he's willing to put into the deal should the appraisal not come in at the sales price. Simple thing would be here to adjust it that the appraisal contingency shall be at appraised value at a minimum of purchase price, or check the box, 950,000. It's better than someone that needs the property to come in at full sales price. At least it's better than that versus someone with no contingency on the appraisal at all. So this appraisal contingency is if it doesn't have to be at the sales price, and it could be a little bit lower, and your buyer has some extra additional funds that they're planning on putting in, and you want to still have an appraisal contingency, this is a great little item to use, this verbiage here. Again, the appraisal is 17 days after acceptance, or you have the ability to have no appraisal contingency. Okay, so and this verbiage here is if you have that VA loan, it doesn't matter if you have the appraisal contingency or not, is reminding everyone that it needs to appraise, or buyer can get his deposit back. Okay, so loan and appraisal. The rest of the contingencies need to be done. Here's you cannot waive these contingencies on this contract. You need a contingency removal form, and this is what you would use here, contingency removal. So if you were removing all the contingencies, you would check this box, and you would still check this box and this box, no loan contingency, no appraisal contingency, but you would also address it in the contingency removal. Okay. It also puts some verbiage together that removal of the contingencies is against our advice. Okay, so we covered loan, we covered appraisal. This paragraph L3, which is in 8C and 12, it's the investigation of the property. Used to be considered what, paragraph 14, all the items of the investigations of the property, 17 days. And you could remove the contingency by putting 0 and doing the CR attached. Now there's another item here, and it's in the current contract, but it's worded a little bit differently. Informational access to property. This is saying that the buyer has the right to get into the property for informational purposes for 17 days. And it's not a new contingency, but it's giving the buyer the right to bring in his contractors, to do additional investigations, to do whatever, go in there and take measurements of the room, to do whatever they want. They have the right to access the property for the 17 days in here. If there's no investigation of property contingency, and they go in for the informational access to the property, and they discover something, they don't have the right to back out and get their deposit back because they waive their investigation of the property contingency. Now, do they have the right to get out of the contract? Yes, every buyer has the right to get out of the contract, but they might be in jeopardy of losing their deposit for breach of contract. So they have the right to get out of the contract. What they are doing is breaching the contract. And the consequences could be they could be losing their deposit. So it's important here that to understand that just because there's no contingencies on the investigation of property, the buyer does have the right to get inside the property. If the seller doesn't want the buyer to get inside the property, then he would have to address this on here. But I caution you, if something goes wrong 6 months, 9 months, a year later, and the buyer's going after the seller for maybe not disclosing, and the judge sees that the seller did not allow informational access to the property for the buyer, there may be some thoughts there that is the seller trying to hide something and not letting the buyer do some informational access to the property. I caution you as a seller's agent not to have the seller not grant access to the buyer for access. Okay, next contingency is a review of the seller documents. Okay, so this is 17 days or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. So in other words, if it takes 17 days and the seller has not given the disclosures to the buyer, the buyer's contingency is not due because he had 17 days or 5 days after receipt. So if he gets the documents on day 15, he now has until day 20 to remove the contingency. Important on this, guys. Gotta read this and make sure that you know the buyer's rights in this regard. And as a seller, you know you need to get these disclosures as quickly as possible to the buyer. L5 is the preliminary title report. Same thing, 17 days or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. Now, I'm not talking about the initial preliminary title report that was when the escrow was opened 3 months ago. I'm talking about the current preliminary title report with the buyer's names on it. That's the one that is the most important on here. The preliminary title report. The HOA docs in L6, the review of any leased or lien items, for example, the solar contract. That would be, again, 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after receipt. The last contingency is the sale of the buyer's property. And that is that COP which nothing is changed on that from what we currently have right now. Those are the 8 contingencies on the part of the buyer, that is all lumped together in one area of the contract. Okay, let's move on. Possession date. We talked about the close of escrow. Now let's talk about possession. There's different items, there's different ways that the property is occupied. It's either going to be the seller occupied or it's tenant occupied. Let's talk about the time of possession. So now it's been changed. The default on this from where we're currently at is the upon the notice of recordation. So in other words, once we know that it's recorded, the buyer has access to the property. It's the buyer's property, he can get it. The default right now is, I think it's at 6 p.m. on the date of close of escrow. So now it's the default is that when notice of recording takes place, or you can still do it the old way where you check the box and put a time frame down, and that could be changed from 6 p.m. to another different time. So that's when we're closing on the time of recording. Let's talk about the seller occupied or vacant occupancy, vacant unit. That's the close of escrow date. So it's either the time when we get the notice of recording on the close of escrow date, or if there's going to be seller in possession, and the seller possession is going to either be check the box, whether it's going to be 29 days or fewer, or more than 30 days or more, which you check the box here. The difference being the SIP or the RLAS. And it says it in the additional terms. And that's important. The SIP is for a seller in possession of 29 days or less, and 30 days or more, you use the RLAS. Okay, so we got the time here. We got the date of possession here. And this is the third item, is if it's tenant occupied. And that tenant occupied is for when the offer is made, not for if the property is going to be vacated prior to close of escrow. So if it's tenant occupied, there's going to be a TOPA form that you're going to need. And in that TOPA form, which I have not seen yet, but I am told that there'll be choices whether it's going to be vacant prior to close of escrow, or if it's going to be tenant occupied after close of escrow. So when we get that addendum, we'll be able to go over it. I don't have it, and it'll be released hopefully before this new RPA is released in mid-December, but it'll be definitely at the latest when the new RPA is released. So a little bit change to that: tenant occupied, or seller occupied, or vacant. And I think it clearly kind of spells it out better than what we had in the past, or what we have currently, and tells you that it's now not an option. Whereas before, I think the current contract says you are advised to do it. Not anymore. We're not talking about advising you. This is the way it's going to be. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the last part of this, which are basically these are seller disclosures. And this talks about N1 talks about when is the seller going to deliver all the documents that he needs to the buyer. It's going to be within 7 days. That's currently on that's currently the number that's on our current RPA, 7 days. The sign and return escrow holder general provisions. This is 5 days after receipt, the seller needs to deliver it back to the escrow company. Time to pay the fees for ordering the HOA documents within 3 days of acceptance. And then this is also to install the smoke alarms, CO detectors, and hot water heater bracing needs to be done 7 days. Doesn't say who's going to pay for it, but it needs to say when is it going to be done. And then O, which looks a lot like 0, was intentionally left blank just so that there's no confusion on that. Okay, let's go into our questions at the end of page 2. What do we got?
Mike, is it safe to assume that, I don't like the word assume, but with the contingency removal box on here, we don't need to include a contingency removal form for loan and appraisal?
You know what? I still do that because there might be some other, yes, I would still like it done. But I think the zip forms will allow it, not that if you just have those two, you don't need the CR form. Because I think it only gets spit out when you check the box in for the below that, the removal waiver of contingency. But you're right, to ask your question, if you're just dealing with the loan and the appraisal, I believe checking the box will satisfy that contingency removal. I would like to have that complete contingency removal form in there though.
Okay,
And you're gonna need that for the other items.
Mike, this is Shelley Paiva. I have a question.
Sure.
So I deal with a lot of investors where they're using hard money lenders. They usually can release the loan and appraisal contingencies right away because it's just based on the property value, and usually it's less than what they're paying anyways. But I just want to make sure on the informational access to property, because sometimes the lenders do want to see the property and need access.
Yeah.
We've already released everything. As long as I still have the informational access, they can go in, or they should be able to go in to look at the property. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm gonna get into that in a few minutes when we talk about the financing end of things.
Okay.
And in this contract, it says that the seller doesn't need to cooperate with the buyer if there's a change of financing. In other words, if they're going for a loan of one aspect and they decide to do something else, the seller doesn't have to cooperate, and the seller doesn't have to let, say, an appraiser in, except with this investigation, informational access to property grants the buyer the right to have the appraiser come in during that time.
Okay, so I can remove everything but that.
You
and
can
they would
remove
still- yeah.
everything but the informational access to property. That would satisfy the ability for an appraiser to get into the property. And still the seller doesn't have to cooperate with that, but he still has to let the buyer get in with the informational access to the property information, the verbiage that's there gets the buyer the ability to get into the property.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I think I answered your question. Basically, even though the seller doesn't have to cooperate, based on that paragraph, he's got to let the buyer in for the first 17 days.
Perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Mike, on verification of loan application where we have the pre-qual, pre-approval, and fully written,
Yeah.
as you clearly stated that there's really no way for us to know. If we leave those blank, is there a problem? Or if we check something, it turns out to be wrong, is there a problem?
Well, I mean, I assume you're representing the buyer, so you're filling out this contract, and when in doubt, put pre-qualification down. I don't know. This is uncharted water. This is the first time we're going to see this. I think it's up to anyone's what their definition is of a pre-approval versus what my definition, Terry, is probably maybe different than what your definition is. So I think from a seller's seller's agent's perspective, I need to, hate to use the word, qualify what's boxed. And if you're writing an offer to me and it says pre-approval, I still think it's the seller's agent's responsibility to explain to the seller what that means. And that whether it's truly a pre-qualification or it's a pre-approval. I have a hard time with the word definition of pre-approval unless it's a fully underwritten pre-approval. Other than that, I think it's more of a pre-qualification as far as I'm concerned. But
Yeah,
that's me.
No,
That's
it's
me.
con- Yeah, it's
That's not,
confusing.
that's not the legal way of things. This is just my definition that everything is a pre-qualification unless I have the underwriter pre-approval. That's kind of how I'm thinking. I could be wrong, but you're not going to change my mind on this.
Yeah, I can see some issues in the future with agents, but okay, good point about just check pre-qual when in doubt. Thanks.
And I would assume that with the being a listing agent or seller's agent, I would unless there's something underwriter's approval, I guess I could grill the lender a little bit. Justin, you have a question?
Yeah, regarding the verification of property condition being now a fixed date or fixed time, 5 days, from close or whatever.
Yeah.
If you say 5 days or 4 days and you miss that day, does that then give the seller the right to then, if your 17 days is up, you don't have, or whatever it is for your informational access to the property, does that give the seller then rights to say, no, you can't come in because you didn't come on the 4th day or the 5th day?
The way I'm viewing this, Justin, is that it's like any other requirement, time requirement put on by the buyer. If you're not going to make your 5 days, you need to have an addendum to change that 5 days to reflect what's reality. That's how I look at this. This is
problematic.
This is a set date. It's no different in my mind than removal of loan contingency in 17 days. If you're not going to make that, the contract needs to be changed to reflect what's going to be made. We'll see what the practice is going to be, but that's how I would consider it standard practice right now, based on next month when this new contract comes out.
Oftentimes the close of escrow date is sometimes moving around based off of various factors, and then you'd have to always be working back exactly from the estimated closing date to the time that you go see it. It's sometimes.
I get it. So but we have to probably be a little more on top of our game when it comes to walkthroughs now.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, let's face it, close of escrow date is an estimation these days. It's not ironclad because of what our lenders are dealing with. So yeah, you're gonna have to go back on pick your close of escrow projection and go backwards.
Ask one other quick question about the verification of funds.
Yes.
Just as a standard of practice, if you look at the contract, it says it can be also provided by the lender. Some lender letters mention reviewing of funds, others don't. As a listing agent, is it better to require the proof of funds in a separate document, not just accepting the fact that the lender has sufficiently reviewed them or not?
I mean, the way that this is written verification of buyer's down payment and closing costs may be made by buyer or buyer's lender or a loan broker pursuant to paragraph B. Doesn't say anything about just accepting the lender's word that there's sufficient funds.
So then it would be understood that either the buyer or the buyer's lender actually provides that proof, that bank
I-
statement or financial statement.
As a seller's agent, I read that to be, and I read that even currently, is that if my seller wants to see the money, he's entitled to getting verification of that.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're back to where are we at now? Paragraph Q.
P.
P.
Lauren.
Yep. Okay. So paragraph P talks about the items included and excluded. This was paragraph 8 in our current contract. If you look at what's here, they've taken things what currently we have a box for stoves, refrigerators, washer and dryer. Well, they've expanded that, and you would check everything that would be included in here. The one thing that's default that is checked is bathroom mirrors. Everything else, it needs to be checked and included if it's going to stay. I could tell you the bathroom mirrors, we got into problems quite a bit, and I can imagine statewide when a buyer would come in after close of escrow and the seller assumed that that mirror was basically like a picture, whereas the buyer assumed it was like a fixed mirror, and that left basically too loosey-goosey, and they needed to change that on our contract, and automatically the default is that the bathroom mirrors, regardless of whether it's permanently attached to the wall or hanging like a picture, those mirrors stay unless it's going to go, and then you have to put it into the excluded items, or more importantly, as a seller's agent, you needed to counter it out as not included, but is going to be excluded in there. So look through the list, everything in the list. One difference is wine refrigerators have been added. Not all refrigerators. Now it's separated between refrigerators and wine refrigerators. So a lot of things based on previous heartburn have now been put in this contract to what we considered, or we inferred what was included, or what we thought was part of what should be, is now detailed on all these things in this contract. Potted trees, shrubs, electric charging stations. So read through this P1 paragraph 9, everything that's included. And then there's also additional lines for what would be added. And then P2 is things that are not included. One of the one of the things in paragraph Q, which I like, if you look at who pays, and it defines now, if both is checked, costs is to be split equally. You know, our current contract doesn't say that it's equally. It just says buyer and seller, that when you check the box, is it 50-50, which we assume, or now it's just totally spelled out. Okay, allocation of costs. This talks about natural hazard disclosure report, including tax information, and you could check the box under additional terms, but it's either a buyer, seller, or both. Both again means split 50-50. Couple blanks here, same thing, seller, buyers, both. Smoke alarms, CO detectors, water heaters, which we talked about 5 minutes ago, that had to be done in 7 days or less. Now it's talking about who's paying for it. Point of sales. Now, the important thing about point of sales, guys, there are no statewide point of sales. It's all local. Even to this day, everything is local. So what does that mean? Know where you're representing your buyers and sellers, where the property is located. You need to know what is required by the local point of sale. And some areas have local point of sales, some areas don't. So just a community announcement that you need to know where you're selling. And again, buyer, seller, both. Escrow fees, buyer, seller, both. I don't like this, each to pay their own fees. I would rather that we don't do that. I didn't get an explanation as to why they put that in like that. Why did the committee do that? But escrow fees, I mean, anyway, I just prefer that you do buyer, seller, both. And to the right additional terms would be escrow holder. I mean, we have the title insurance split as to owner's title insurance policy, and then the buyer's lender's insurance policy. That's clearly it's buyer for the buyer's lender title policy, and the owner's title policy gives you the choice, buyer, seller, or both. And again, additional terms, escrow holder and title company. In our area up here in Northern California, it's more common to have the escrow and title under the same company. But in Southern California, it's usually two different companies. Escrow company and title company are two different companies. I'm going to tell you that escrow fees in Southern California are more than double than what they are in Northern California, sometimes triple. So again, you know, this contract was written for the entire state, to be used by the entire state. So they have to make it simple for both Southern Cal and Northern Cal, and make it so that it's easily changed to be what is common in the area. County transfer tax, buyer, seller, both. City transfer tax, buyer, seller, both. City transfer taxes are different in different areas. San Francisco, Berkeley are a lot more expensive than San Jose. HOA fee in preparing the disclosures is a seller fee. HOA certification fee is a buyer fee. Transfer fees, the negotiable, buyer, seller, both. And look at additional terms. Unless otherwise agreed, seller shall pay for their separate HOA move out fee, and buyer shall pay for the separate move in fee. It'll be billed separately or itemized if there's a cost in the transfer fee. Private transfer fees, negotiable, buyer or seller. Oh, I'm sorry, seller is the default, but it could be also the buyer or the buyer and the seller. Private transfer fees, there are no new private transfer fees put on any developments as of right now. Within the last few years, that's been eliminated. However, there are existing private transfer taxes that are still being done, most of them in the Central Valley, a few isolated places where they exist in the Bay Area, but most of them occur in the Central Valley. And basically it's like a county transfer tax, except it's being paid by it's being paid to a private company, and are now being disclosed in the preliminary title reports, as well as natural hazard disclosure statements, where now it's really being exposed whether there is one or not. And these fees can be expensive. They could be 1% to 2% of the purchase price, and it goes to a private entity instead of money that goes to the county or the city or some type of funds to be put back into the community for repairs and maintenance and things like that. 2 blanks for additional fees or costs and who's paying for them. And then the home warranty, paragraph Q8, now talks about home warranty plan, who's going to be paying for it. There's only 3 choices: buyer, seller, split, or the buyer waives the home warranty plan. Cost not to exceed blank, and issued by the company or by seller's choice or by buyer's choice or whatever you want to have in there. The one thing it doesn't have the agent paying for the home warranty. So you need to either have who's paying for it or it's going to be waived. Now, if the buyer does check the box that it's going to be waived, does he have the right to get the home warranty at a later time before a close of escrow? Absolutely. Okay, but you put down what the price not to exceed. It doesn't talk about any additional upgraded premium service. It's just based on a cost now, and issued by either the company or issued by buyer's choice. Any other questions on, or actually, any questions on page 3? No place for agent to pay for the home warranty, which I'm happy with. And again, we're not parties to the contract, so we're not putting anything in there as well.
Mike, just a side note, I recently closed something in Watsonville. House was built in the late 90s. And this is regarding private transfer fees for the betterment of everyone watching. So in the HOA documents, there's no HOA fee, but there were CC&Rs like you'll see in new construction or old construction. And buried in the CC&Rs was a 1% private transfer fee. And so we need to read those, is what I'm saying.
Terry, let me ask you a question. It was not put in the preliminary title report?
It wasn't, only in the blue hyperlink to the CC&Rs, correct. It was not listed separately. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I had the same thing for a mentee in Roseville. And this one was buried deep into like 20, 50 pages into the HOA documents.
And nothing in the natural hazard disclosure statement?
No.
How long ago was that?
Yeah, the one in Watsonville, I just closed last month.
Really?
Yeah. Now, maybe I missed it. I mean, I caught it right away because I know that I've seen it before in the HOA documents buried. But I don't remember seeing it on the one in Watsonville on the natural.
Can you forward that to me and I'll forward to CAR?
Yeah.
Because the one thing that was decided as a result of that, because CAR had a hard time against private transfer fees, even though it just stinks. CAR as an organization believes in private property rights. And if an owner of a property wants to put an encumbrance on their own property, I guess they should be able to do it. The issue that was the argument for CAR in dealing with this in Sacramento is that you do what you want, Mr. Owner, to do what you want against the property. There's going to be, market conditions will eventually prevail. However, you need to properly disclose it to the consumers so they can make a choice. So that to me, what you went through doesn't seem like that was disclosed the way that it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's something we just needed to find. The transfer fee was to go into affordable housing, so that's how they itemized it. But it wasn't in your face as a disclosure.
Yeah, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my opinion, but
Yeah, it is. That's
hopefully-
why I was just mentioning that it needs to be read, or, one time I was on the seller side, the other time I was on the buyer side. So because of the seller side, I'm very super hyper vigilant now on both sides.
Yeah, all right, well, we take this offline, but get it to me and I need to get it out there. Any other questions on page 3?
I have a question, Mike,
Sure.
regarding items that are included and excluded. I had a listing and we were in escrow when we realized, oh, shoot, there are rain barrels here. Where would you put rain barrels?
Additional items included.
Okay. Can we kind of assume as the listing agent, should we say, I'm thinking we should say they're included from the beginning?
That's great. Just make sure
Okay.
it makes it onto the contract.
Okay. All right, that was it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, you know what? The idea of assuming, hopefully they spent 3 years on this contract to get all the assumptions out of the way. And I gotta be honest with you, these guys that are on the committee, the forms committee, they go through hours upon hours of work. It's the hardest working committee for CAR that's there. Every single realtor, and there's 212,000 realtors at CAR. If they sent an email or a comment about some form or some note about what they are concerned about, or whether they want to change it, or whether they want to add something, I could assure you they go through every single communication with every single agent for these forms. I know a couple people on the forms committee, and I'm telling you, they work their butt off to get what we wind up using. So if there's any concerns that you have regarding this contract, they will look at it. If you send them an email, they will review it. They don't just put things aside. Okay, let's get into page 4. We're actually a little ahead of schedule, and we'll cover the next full paragraph, and then we'll set you on your way for tomorrow. Property addendas and advisories. So this new contract eliminates a couple other contracts, and the first 2 that you see in paragraph 4A, the probate agreement purchase addendum and the manufactured home purchase addendum, these addendums are now incorporated with our RPA. So if you have a mobile home purchase, you use this contract and you check paragraph 4A, a manufactured home purchase addendum. Same thing if you have a probate purchase agreement addendum. There's no more probate contracts. So these 2, that eliminates that. The third box is our TOPA, which is a brand new contract. It's what if the property at the time that the contract is written, if there are tenants in the property, whether they're going to be moving out before close of escrow or not, we need to have this form. And actually it says it next to where the box is. Should be checked whether current tenants will remain, or even if they leave, you need to have the tenant occupied property addendum included in this RPA. And in the addendum, it'll address whether the tenant will be vacated prior to close of escrow. We don't have many ticks in our area, but there's an addendum if there's a tenancy in common purchase on a tick, as well as a stock cooperative purchase addendum if it's in a co-op ownership. So These are addendums to be utilized with where we have the situation arising. But the good news is the manufactured home as well as probate will now be addendums to this RPA. Paragraph B talks about other addendums. So if you look through the addendums, the same regular vanilla addendum number 1, 2, 3, that would be checked if you're using that. If we're going to do a backup offer, you would check this box. If you have the SWPI, the septic and well, you would check that box. Short sale addendums, court confirmation addendums, exchange addendums, whether it be a buyer or a seller, or of course, any other addendums that you want to include would be used in paragraph B. There's a difference between an addendum and an advisory. An addendum is part of the contract. An advisory is telling the buyer or seller or both what to be aware of in the purchase. And advisories are not part or incorporated into the agreement, whereas the addendums are. Okay, so there's some advisories that are automatically checkbox. I think they blew it. I think they should have not only done the BIA form, which they do right now, and the wire fraud advisory, which they do right now, the fair housing they do right now, and the privacy they currently do. They really should have, and I'm telling you that I think you ought to be doing this, is have the statewide buyer and seller advisory included on all sales. And that should be checked, in my opinion. However, make sure that, we have it in our checklist that that's included anyway, but it would have been easier if it was just included in here. And then some other advisories, such as the probate, REO, if there's a trust, and the wildlife disaster advisory, if it's in a high or severely high fire zone, would all be addendums that would be included on that. You know what? Since we had this from 1 to 3, let's keep on going. Let's do part of paragraph 5, and let's move on this. I don't think we'll cover all of it, but we'll try to do it by 3 o'clock. Okay, so this paragraph 5 is really where we had the currently paragraph 3, which talks about the deposits and the loans and all cash offer. Let's go through this and really supplements that what we have on the grid on that. So the first things first is that the deposit is going to be the funds are going to be good when deposited the escrow holder. That's number one. What a way to start off a transaction if the funds aren't any good. Now with wiring, hopefully it's easy to determine whether it's good or not. Now regarding the grid, that said, that the first option is going to be wire, or you could check the box and put something else. In this paragraph, this further goes on to say, then if the buyer and the seller pick a method other than the wire transfer, if it's unacceptable to the escrow holder, then it's automatically going to go to the wire transfer. So that's in 5A1 that talks about that. So that's new. Clearly in this, there's no option like we have right now where it could be number one, the check is not going to be given to the agent. That is not, if you look at the history of the RPA, years ago, that was the only option, that the buyer would give the check to the buyer's agent and he would deal with it. Then they changed the contract to now have option A and option B, which was the buyer's going to get it to the escrow directly, or you could check the box, I think it was number 2, where that check is given to the agent, which was the way it used to be 20 years ago. This version makes no inference to the buyer's agent at all, and that the buyer's the one that's dealing with the deposit, period. Let's look at the increased deposit. This talks about, again, that RID form now changing to a DID form, and you need that DID form or the prior RID form in order to make that deposit part of liquidated damages. Paragraph 3, it talks about the retention of deposit, and as a remedy, that if the buyer defaults, that the seller may have the right to retain the deposit, but nowhere in residential real estate is it automatic. That you need to go through liquidated damages, and it needs to the requirements need to be met in liquidated damages to deal with that deposit. So us as agents always say that that deposit, if the buyer defaults, that deposit is at risk. Doesn't mean it's automatically going to be given to the seller. Seller's going to have to sue for it, and we'll talk about it tomorrow as to how they can go after that deposit on a buyer breach of contract on that. Let's talk about all cash offer. The all cash offer, there's no need, if you check the box that it's an all cash offer, no loan is needed. It's not contingent on the buyer obtaining a loan, because there's all cash offer, he's not getting a loan. And that they need to deliver verification of funds sufficient for the purchase price and the closing costs on an all cash offer. And that option, the default on that in the grid is that it's going to be with the offer, not the 3 days or check the box days like we have right now. So it's kind of reversed on that. So it's the default is that it's going to accompany the offer right now. Loans, the default is that the first loan is going to be conventional unless those other boxes are checked in the grid. On there, additional financed amount will be the second loan, and it'll talk about the verbiage is the same as what it has in the first loan about the interest rates and points and things like that. So this paragraph 3, buyer's loan status, this is new. And what's new is that the status, and never talked about the status of the buyer's loan before, but this talks about the that the seller or the seller's agent, that the buyer's allowing the seller's agent or the seller to contact the buyer's lender to determine the status of the buyer's loan. It's not asking for any specifics that would jeopardize the lender in terms of giving private information out, but it does give the seller or seller's agent the right to ask the lender for what the status of where the loan is. And that was not spelled out in this current contract. It is spelled out now. And the other thing is that if you get, give you an example, if you as a listing agent, you get that pre-qualification or pre-approval letter from the lender, and the buyer changes the lender, you have the right as the seller's agent to ask the buyer for updated contact information within 1 day of the seller's request. So that's new in here also, and right into this. If the contact information for buyer's lender is different than that is provided, then the buyer shall deliver the updated contact information within 1 day of seller's request. So that's also new and added to that, which I think is a great idea. And then it also talks if it's FHA, VA, it talks about within the 17 days that the seller shall get delivered by the buyer the notice of their lender requirements of what's needed to be done to the home in order for the buyer to get the loan. It doesn't talk about that the seller has to pay for it, but it has to the seller deserves the knowledge of what needs to get done. Even if there's nothing that needs to get done, if there's no lender requirements, seller shall be notified that as well. And in the last line, it says seller shall have no obligation to pay or satisfy any or all lender requirements unless agreed in writing. Paragraph D. Again, the balance of the purchase price, that hasn't changed. And the lender limits on credits to the buyer, that hasn't changed either, where if there is a credit to the buyer, it is going to be limited by the lender. And if the lender limits it less than what the credits are, the buyer loses those credits. So if the buyer and seller negotiate for credits and the lender puts a limit of those credits, the sellers does not pay for them or give the money separately to the buyer, because that's lender fraud, and the buyer stuck with what the limits are to the per the lender of what the seller will give and what's allowable for credit. Okay, any questions on that? We're going to stop right here on this one. Any questions on this old paragraph 3, which is paragraph 5 now? Any questions at all regarding the what we talked about today? Nothing? All right, anybody out there? I'm open to any questions you have. We're gonna quit a couple of minutes early, and I have the time to talk about anything and everything. Doesn't even have to be on this deal, on this contract. Could be on a transaction.
Question on E, limits on credits to buyer.
Okay.
Sometimes, like, when you get credit from, like, even agent crediting to buyer, sometimes, like, the purchase price gets reduced, that gets agreed upon between buyer and seller to adjust that. Is that still allowed, or is that not allowed anymore?
Yeah, an adjustment on the purchase price is not a credit. So that's totally fine. That there's no limitation on that. We're only talking about credits. What banks want to do, what lenders want to make sure is that the buyer, if they're getting an 80% loan, 20% down, is that they're putting 20% down. If this paragraph wasn't here, I'll tell you what I would do. I would take $1 million sale and I would tell the seller, listen, I'll buy it for $1.2 million and give me a $200,000 credit. And you still get your $1 million back. And I'm going to try to get a loan on $1.2 million. I basically won't have to put 20% down then. And that's not the flavor of what lenders want to see. So that's why they put a limit as to how much the credit's going to be. Because under that 1.2 scenario where I'm getting $200,000 credit, and I'm getting an 80% loan on 1.2, I'm basically putting a very little amount down payment. And that's not the intention of what the lender wants to see. They want to see me with 20% skin in the game. And that's why there's a limit on credits to the buyer.
Thank you.
Anything else? I guarantee you guys what you thought of and how to negotiate different things. I thought of a long time ago.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Just in general, as it relates to the new contract and the investigative, contingencies. It seems to me like the conversation I'm going to have with my buyers is going to shift significantly because it breaks out all of the individual contingencies, right? Where in the current contract, it's kind of all blanketed together in that 14B. And
Well-
so we didn't have to have those conversations up front, but now we have to have all of those conversations up front about each of those individual things. It's going to change the nature of how fast we can move forward, right?
I disagree with you because
Okay.
I think it's all still bundled together under the investigation. So the contingency, there's a contingency for investigation. And that investigation now includes, everything that was spelled out in paragraph 14, Megan's Law, where they spelled it out with Megan's Law, they fire insurability, everything now is just bundled under investigation of the contingency. I just two ways of thinking of it, but really nothing has changed. It just basically this new one basically says loan, appraisal, investigation, and then seller disclosures. So maybe to the extent it does divide it out under a contingency, seller disclosure contingency, investigation contingency. I kind of like the way it is on this one. And if you don't like it, you once you utilize it, you'll have to get used to it.
I like it as a listing agent. I don't like it as a buyer's agent.
Okay, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Anything else, guys? Anything else on this? This was supposed to be rolled out a year ago, but they decided that with COVID, we were frying our brains enough on everything and we didn't need to deal with a new purchase agreement. So they've been tweaking with it all year. And it's a lot of it is really similar. It's just different areas of the contract it just shifted around a little bit. And a lot of this stuff that has been added was really, I'm going to say, assumed with the current contract, which is now spelled out in this contract. Hopefully it'll eliminate some disagreements. I mean, believe it or not, that bathroom mirror thing, that was there was more arguments about that than you would imagine, because the seller's treating it as a like a painting that's hung, and a buyer's thinking that that's part of the structure of the bathroom is having a mirror. Little things like that, just little tweaks makes a big difference.
I like it. I like that possession that happens on recording. And I really like that the water heater and the CO, that they have a timeline that can be dealt with prior to the buyer's appraisal visit, even though they don't state that specifically, but that's something that's always been a point of contention for me.
Yeah.
I do have, like, back to the escrow fees where it says, like, that one box where you said we don't like, because it says each to pay their own. Something
Well,
came up.
That's, I don't like it. That's
Yeah.
not that everyone else could love it. It's just, I'm giving you my personal opinion.
Oh, I know. Well, I actually had a question on that prior to this contract even coming out, and I was going to ask you, but it wasn't something that ever affected me. but it was something that I saw trending in one of my real estate Facebook groups. And they were stating that in certain types of transactions where someone might be having more escrow fees for one side, maybe someone's doing a 1031 or they're doing something else, that by making it split, that it wasn't fair, and so they started changing it for each to pay their own. And I'd never heard that before, and I also didn't hear that there were other fees that could be unfair.
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine that there could be, by checking this box now there could be some split off in terms of the actual fees for an escrow.
Yeah, so I would think on when I represent a seller, if that box is checked, that I would need to do some further investigation.
Yeah, I don't like it because I think it becomes more loosey-goosey, in my opinion, but I just might not have enough experience with a certain amount of these deals. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sure this will be revised again. Will be tweaked, but I overall we'll see once we start in. My biggest concern is once the switch is flipped, and I'll pick out a date, December 15th. There's going to be a lot of people that we're going to have to educate just to make our transactions happen. So, one thing though is that if we're in escrow and the switch is flipped, don't worry about it. The old contract through escrow is still fine. You don't need to change any documents or anything like that. Just keep what you got going. But once it's switched, I want everyone to their new transactions to utilize the new contract. The big test for us guys, I got to be honest, is going to be the disclosures or the forms that go with this that we don't have right now. We're going to have to get up to speed on that pretty quick. Other than that, anything else, guys? Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, we'll bang this out and we'll get everything done. Take a look over what we did, especially if you guys do this for the first time. Some of you guys, this is at least the third time that you've gone through it. So feel free to have your questions ready tomorrow. We'll take a couple minutes. We'll go over the questions for today, and then we'll bang out the second half and we'll get everything done by tomorrow. Okay?
All right.
I appreciate your
you.
time, guys. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mike.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.